about a week ago or just a few days ago, I had a little bit of an anniversary where my first esports article ever came out on the 28th of May in 2016. So this is sort of just a very minor event, but it just sort of forced me to reconsider what I've been doing for the last year or so. And if you've been following my content with any regularity for a stretch of time, you'll probably notice that I've been moving more and more away from North American content, specifically like mid-tier North American content, more and more to like better and better Counter-Strike, to the best North American teams, to just the best teams in the world. And, I've just been sort of covering what's topical, who are the best, and, maybe doing some historical pieces on North American Counter-Strike specifically. But generally moving away from the NA topic and more towards just the best Counter-Strike. And as I've been sort of thinking about this transition, this guy, Max Millette, who's another writer for .esports, released this audio recording a couple days ago where he actually was advocating for covering your regional scene, something like Man Up covering your regional scene or something like this. I'll link the SoundCloud recording in the description box below. But in this this audio recording is sort of directly contradicting my own sort of unspoken before this recording, this video, my own philosophical sort of shift away from covering stuff that I'm interested in within my region, so to speak, within my wheelhouse, to just covering what's the best Counter-Strike. So there's some sort of conflict here, and I thought I might as well go into this conflict in this video and talk about why I have a different perspective than Max. Okay, so this is obviously going to be a fairly niche topic because, a lot of people watching this aren't making videos and writing articles, but maybe from a viewer perspective, you can think of it as, what do you prefer to watch? Do you prefer to watch your own sort of regional scene, whatever quality those games might be, or do you prefer watching, the best Counter-Strike? And what's the conflict, and why should you do one or the other? Okay, so the Max audio recording was actually created in response to another article, so we're like 3 people down the chain now. And the article was by Sam Delarome, I think that's how you pronounce that, and he was writing an article about the difficulty of narrative analysis, talking specifically about how, these preconceptions we have in our mind via motivated reasoning or status quo bias can help or can hurt our ability to properly perceive the present, that our past preconceptions, our past understanding of players, or past model of the game, to use that sort of buzzword that I think a lot of people are using now, model. Those can impede our ability to properly see what's really happening in the present moment. And what Max saw from that article was, he was saying that these problems, this inability to move beyond our preconceptions, is actually a good reason for why you should cover your regional scene. He suggests that, because there's not a lot of narrative surrounding these lesser known players and these lesser known teams, a lot lesser known for mid-tier Australian Counter-Strike. I mean, mid-tier Australian Counter-Strike is just, I think, totally off the grid for most people. I think, for mid-tier North American teams, or I mean, mid-tier European teams are still pretty good, but for those regions, people still know those names, but for mid-tier Australian Counter-Strike, it's pretty unknown, right? So his argument was that, you can escape this sort of problem, these preconceptions, these biases, because when you move into a scene that's less covered, you can create your own narratives. You can, wholly decide what a player is like. It doesn't matter what he did 2 years ago, what he did last year. You're looking at a player now, and you can, best evaluate what he's doing now. It's completely original. It's completely up to you. Or, I mean, it's not completely original. Obviously, you have to be in some accordance with reality. But you get to perceive reality without any preconceptions, without any past interference, or you're not biased because of the work of anyone else. So this is a good reason for him for why he thinks it's a good idea to cover regional or lower tier Counter-Strike. Now my response to this would be that yes, 100% biases and preconceptions and past understanding and other people's understanding can influence your own, and that can be problematic. That could lead you askew, and maybe you make wrong decisions. Maybe you think a player is good where he's actually pretty average or pretty mediocre or actually kind of bad because of his past reputation of being a good player. But the problem with this is, I think just because it's difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I think when you're making content, there's really two directions you can go in. One's originality. I mean, the idea is with originality is the entertainment, the quality, the value of your work comes from the fact that you are creating something new, something different, something outside of other people's model or preconception or the past narratives. The other direction is like execution or entertainment, that you're not really bringing anything new to the table. You're not breaking down why Virtus.pro is not doing well or why they're so good at this exact moment, but you're just using narratives to create this story, create this piece that might be entertaining itself. The way you've written it is actually really entertaining. But in either of these two scenarios, I don't think the fact that other people have done this work is a negative. In fact, it's a positive in both scenarios. If other people have written about certain players a certain way and then you're going a completely different direction, that's just a benefit. That's only going to make your work stand out more. And then not the opposite, but the same thing is sort of true for just the entertainment article or the execution article. In that scenario, you are piggybacking, using secondary research. You're using sort of known narratives, but you're reconstructing in a way that you think is more entertaining or especially elucidating or in some way valuable, right? But you can use the narratives known, and you can maybe even go down certain routes further or something. You can play with the ideas of other people and to make it a more entertaining article, right? So I don't think in either of these two scenarios, in either route you take, having other people do work in the same area hurts your article. I think in the audio recording, Max specifically says that there's so many other writers out there, so many other content creators. A lot the topic of Astralis, because they've been the best team in the world for a while now, is really heavily covered, and he'd actually give pause to writing an article about Astralis. But I mean, from my perspective, if I have something original to say about Astralis, or from my own perspective I have a different take on Astralis than everyone else, then that's only going to be more valuable. And because there's a lot of attention on Astralis, my own personal take on Astralis, if it's original or if it's just super well executed, is only going to get more traction because so many people are thinking about Astralis. We see Astralis in the finals of a lot of tournaments, or the semifinals of every tournament, basically. Yeah, I don't think they've not made top 4 or higher in any tournament they've entered since they picked up Glaive. Yeah, so I mean, I don't see how this is a problem. I don't want to call it cowardice, but it seems like, yeah, that's really mean if I'd say it's cowardice, but it seems like the fear of trying to, of not being original is just pushing you out of the equation entirely, and that, just because everyone else is doing it, maybe I shouldn't because I want to be especially original. But I mean, if you're doing it through your own niche, your own viewpoint, your own quote-unquote model, then it should be very original. It shouldn't be like everyone else's article about Astralis or a video about Astralis. Now that said, the second part of Max's argument is he was saying that he thought that when he created his own model, his own understanding of the Australian scene, and then something outside the norm happened, something outside the model that, Chiefs can beat North, that this is especially profound, I think is the word he uses. That he creates his own model, and then things can break that model, or things can inform the model because he's so much more personally invested, that it's especially profound, I think is what he's arguing in his audio recording. Now, I think the same sort of argument can be taken up for covering the best teams in the world. When you are trying to be really original and you take a certain take on Virtus.pro, like before the major, I was saying that predicting Virtus.pro to be the favorites of the tournament was sort of weird in my opinion, because I thought that I wouldn't express that the highest level of confidence that they'd win the tournament or they'd be in the finals of the tournament, because you see their form, which wasn't great at the time. They didn't do well at E-League Season 2 or at WESG. So to express the highest amount of confidence Virtus.pro will win the major, I thought was really weird. So I actually wrote an article, I did my first audio recording ever, about why I didn't think that would happen or why I thought that might not happen. I talked about some of the matchups they might play and why I thought the probability was low that they actually win the tournament. Now, they did actually win the tournament. They did go to the finals. But the reason I bring this up is because as I was watching the tournament, I've obviously have a more vested interest in Virtus.pro. And, people going off on Twitter, saying that Virtus.pro is going to win it, with each successive win they're getting closer, and people are really clamoring for their prediction to be right. But I'm, the antagonist. I went against these people's predictions. I went out of my way to say I don't think those predictions make sense. So I was sort of motivated the other way. I was more invested from my perspective, in Virtus.pro not doing well, or I thought, it's so strange that Pasha is doing so well at this tournament. Where is this coming from? That Virtus.pro was suddenly able to compete with Astralis and compete with all these other teams that looked also pretty good at the time, where Virtus.pro was sort of falling off or didn't look good for the last couple of months. So I was very much invested because I went against the tide. Now, if you were writing a piece about Virtus.pro or Astralis or North or someone like this, that's more along the lines of execution and entertainment and just writing a good narrative, then maybe I can see that you're not as personally invested in the games and what the outcomes in the games and your own enjoyment of the narratives and what's happening, because you're just going to say what everyone else said, or you're not. That's a bit of a rude characterization. It's more like when you see the tournament going on, it doesn't really matter what happens, because you're going to craft a narrative afterwards describing what happened, or maybe not eulogizing, but hyping up the effects of the tournament, like how much grit a certain team had, or how amazing a certain player is, or the story of a player going from like the bottom of the scene to the top in a year or something like this, or no one expected this player to do well and he proved them all wrong, or some of these are really cliche narratives. I'm not trying to disparage people who write more execution style articles. I think my last Virtus.pro article is more of that sort of style, just talking about where they are in their narrative and just sort of inserting my ideas in there just sort of minimally. But maybe from that perspective you wouldn't be as interested. But I mean, if you're this sort of writer that really loves narrative and really loves, sort of the events, and you want to build up these moments or show, or maybe the opposite, you want to really tear down a team that was supposed to win. They were the favorites, they were Goliath, and then they got hit by the slingshot, which might have been a North American team, or Gambit or someone like this, sort of an underdog, right? Yeah, I think if you're from that perspective, I think it's also super interesting to watch these tournaments. So I'm not particularly sure where I don't completely understand, or from my perspective, it doesn't make sense for why you would ever cover lesser or less interesting, or not less interesting, but less competitive Counter-Strike, less high-level Counter-Strike, because I think you can find everything you need in high-level Counter-Strike from a narrative perspective, or someone who wants to model the game, or someone who wants to be original. I think you can find that niche within the highest level Counter-Strike. Not the niche, but you can find your own sort of hole. And if you can't find a hole, I don't want to say anything bad about anyone, but if you can't find a hole, if you can't write an article from your own perspective, I mean, that's really not a good sign for you as a writer. I mean, I'm not going to use the word cowardice, but I think if you are a great writer and if you are confident in yourself and you do have your own viewpoint and your own experiences and your own way of seeing things, I don't see how you could possibly overlap or be shoved out of the market by other people. And especially if you are a really good writer, if you are confident in yourself or your video making or your, whatever piece of content you're making, if you're going to do an audio recording or breakdown of a play or an article or whatever have you, I think there's no way that two people could write the same article, that one person's article is invalidating someone else's if you are doing something great yourself. I mean, I don't see how that would, I just don't understand how that would work. So that's sort of my perspective. Maybe as a viewer you could think about it like, yeah, maybe there's an entertainment factor to sort of this new ulterior scene, but I think that's sort of this weird hipsterism almost as a viewer, as a writer, when you want to cover something else that no one else is covering. And I've sort of moved away from that sort of perspective over the past year.